Good morning from Georges River Environmental Education Centre. My name is Julie Overton and I'm a teacher here. We have some interesting things that we're going to do today, but before we start with anything, I'd like to do a acknowledgement of country. We are on Darug land here at Georges River EEC at Chipping Norton. So I want to just extend my thanks to the Darug people for looking after the land for thousands of years and for them to also value all the plants and animals. And I've been passing that message on to the students that we have here at the centre. So I acknowledge elders past, present and future. And I'm going to now hand over to Leanne and she can introduce herself. Leanne.
Thanks, Julie. My name's Leanne Niblock. I'm from Sydney Water. My job title is River City Lead, but what that really entails is working with the Cooks River Alliance and the councils in the Cooks River catchment to look at water quality in the river and the health of the river. So it's a really exciting place to be. The Cooks River is a great place. So very excited to be chatting to the students today. Sue.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Julie and Leanne. My name's Sue Burton. I'm the Executive Officer of the Cooks River Alliance. And the Cooks River Alliance are 4 councils working together to improve river health. I'd also like to acknowledge country and to acknowledge that the Cooks River falls in the lands of the Eora people, and to acknowledge the traditional owners and current owners, and also Aboriginal people who've moved to the Cooks River and call it their home, and that special custodianship relationship they have. Thanks, Julie.
Okay, so we're going to be asking a few questions that we've received from students who have been doing the Cooks River project, and we'll see if we can answer them today for them. So the first question, this one's a really good one. What is the difference between stormwater and rainwater?
That's a really good question. And in a lot of cases, I think you probably would think they're the same. I guess the way you can look at it is all stormwater comes from rainwater. So rainwater is what falls out of the sky onto your roofs and onto surfaces. Stormwater generally describes the rainwater that's been picked up and discharged through pipes, off roads, flows through drains, and across other hard surfaces, and often has picked up a range of pollutants along the way.
Excellent. Good. Okay. Do all drains lead to the river and ocean?
That's a really good question. When you think about the huge network of drains that exist in cities. Look, I guess predominantly all stormwater drains are designed to flow towards the river and ocean. It's designed this way because that's the way naturally water would have flowed before our cities were built. So water flows obviously following gravity across the land and into our creeks and rivers. I guess that's why it's important for people to remember that you shouldn't put anything else into the stormwater system, because predominantly it does flow directly to our rivers and creeks. In some cases, the stormwater system is designed to pass through, I guess, treatment areas. So might be a wetland or another natural system, or a man-made structure that's designed to filter out pollutants before entering the waterways. But the traditional approach has obviously been to remove stormwater quickly from our built-up areas in heavy rain. And so it follows that path, I guess, directly into the rivers and creeks predominantly. Now, the other thing is, obviously within your property, there's wastewater drains as well. So the things that your toilets flush into, your sinks drain, your washing machines discharge to, industrial sites might discharge industrial water into the wastewater system. And all that water is usually sent to a treatment plant. So the water goes in quite contaminated, obviously, and it's treated before either being discharged either into the ocean in Sydney in some cases, or it can be recycled. So, and then that recycled water can be reused again for another purpose. So it might be irrigation in parks and gardens, or it might be reused in industry through their industrial processes. So there's kind of two systems, I guess, we're talking about here. There's the stuff that comes out of your, that we know is very dirty, that comes out of your toilets and sinks. But the stormwater system is obviously separate. They run as two completely separate systems.
Excellent, Leanne. It's really good to get that description of the two different systems, the wastewater system and the stormwater system. I know a lot of our students, when they visit our centre, get really confused with that. So that was a really nice description of that. Next question, how is stormwater managed?
Well, most people are probably aware it's managed predominantly through a big underground network of pipes and pits. So you'll see on the road edges, there's lots of stormwater drains that drains the water off the road. Your house often drains out into the gutter at the front of your house. And then it flows into a big underground network of pipes. I guess in some cases you will see some of those pipes open out into above ground channels. So Sydney Water owns quite a bit of infrastructure where you can see the stormwater flow into a constructed open channel. And then that generally discharges down into our creeks and rivers. Like I said before, the stormwater system is really designed to stop properties from flooding in heavy rain. So traditionally the stormwater system's been designed to do this really as quickly and as efficiently as possible. What has happened obviously is as we've built bigger cities and we've built more houses and more roads, there's less opportunity for water that would traditionally have soaked into the ground to do that now. So the water is often removed off those sites as quickly as possible, which is a bit of a shame because that's how it picks up a whole lot of pollutants along the way. It picks them up off those hard surfaces, unfortunately, and can often directly deposit them then into our creeks and rivers. However, in more recent times, I guess we've become much more aware of the impacts of stormwater on our local waterways. And so you've started to see a real shift in terms of how new systems are designed. So I guess we're more conscious about the need to treat stormwater before it enters our waterways. And so you're starting to see a whole lot of new practices. So people constructing what we call rain gardens or wetlands to actually capture the water in a natural system and allow some natural filtration processes to remove some of those pollutants before they discharge into the local waterway. So we're getting better at it. I guess we're working with quite an old system and change is a bit slow, but we certainly know where we should be headed now and where good design can lead us.
Excellent. Well, that sort of leads us into the next question. You started to answer it with some of the examples. What does good stormwater management look like?
So really, I guess really good stormwater management is about retaining as much water on site as you possibly can. So it's the opposite of what we've done to date, remove it as quickly as possible. What you really want to do is, I guess, consider a combination of things. So rainwater harvesting is a really common one that most people do. Most new homes are constructed with a rainwater tank. Most of the schools have rainwater tanks in place. So that captures a huge amount of the water that would have otherwise just run off your roof and into the stormwater drainage system. But I guess the other things that you would really want to consider is maximising the amount of green space you've got on your site. So maximising how much vegetation you've got on site and maximising those areas where water can actually soak into the ground rather than having lots of hard surfaces on your property. The other thing you can do is look at how you might be able to direct water from those hard surfaces into a green area. So, for example, in the case of a school, you might have water run off an asphalt area, but potentially if you can drain that water into a garden nearby, then that gives the water the opportunity to soak into the ground rather than just flow off the hard surface into a stormwater drain. And then I guess the remaining part of that is really, if water is allowed to discharge off the property, looking at options to treat that. So it might be through directing it to a wetland or to a treatment system called a rain garden. but I guess it's a natural system to try and capture those remaining pollutants that have come off with the stormwater.
Excellent. You've partially answered the next question again, which is really good. What could schools and the community do better when thinking about stormwater?
Yes, I think we've talked about some of those things. Definitely rainwater tanks is the really obvious one. And one of the good things is once you've got a rainwater tank, if you use the water on site regularly, then what that does is allow the tank to remain partially empty all the time. And so when you get that next big rainfall event, there's capacity for that rainwater tank to take up that rainwater rather than simply discharge it straight into the stormwater system. So rainwater tanks are really easy. I guess the other really obvious one is make sure nothing enters the stormwater system that shouldn't be there. So rubbish, don't wash things into stormwater drains like paint and chemicals. Pick up your dog waste. So if your dog poos on the footpath, pick it up to make sure that it doesn't flow into the stormwater drain. So any of, I guess, those contaminants that potentially could flow into the stormwater system are to be kept out of there. Pick up your lawn clippings, pick up your garden waste and make sure they don't flow into there. The other one is have more green space and less hard areas. So as I said previously, this allows water to soak into the ground rather than simply run off. It's the most simplest and effective way really to treat stormwater pollutants. And again, if you're designing a new space, think about how water flows off hard surfaces. So can you direct that water into a green space? It's inevitable that we have to have hard spaces, with your playgrounds in schools and footpaths and things like that. But with good design, you can ensure that water is directed into a green space rather than having to direct water into a stormwater system. So there's a range of things you can do.
That's good, because that actually does answer the next question, which is stormwater reusable? Because you've named quite a few examples there on how to reuse the stormwater. So we might go on to the next question, what is in stormwater? So
that's can be complex, often a lot of things, and often a lot of nasties, unfortunately. So you might notice after it rains quite heavily, if you go down to your local creek or river, you'll notice that the water looks quite dirty. So often what happens is you get a lot of soil and sediment wash off in rain into the stormwater system. Things like leaf litter. So you'll often notice there's lots of leaf and grasses floating after heavy rain. Rubbish is the big one. We get a lot of plastics, unfortunately, that end up in the river and our local creeks. And it's as simple as putting your rubbish in the bin, but things that are, I guess, dropped on the footpath or on the road, unfortunately, wash into the stormwater drains on the road and ultimately end up in our waterways. So they're the kind of really obvious things you can see, but then there's a whole lot of things that you can't see, which also impact water quality. So things like nutrients. So too many nutrients in a waterway can impact the kind of aquatic life that lives in there. The things that grow in there can lead to algae blooms. Other things are things like oil and grease that washes off our roads. So obviously cars drop bits and pieces as they're on our roads, and with the first flush of heavy rain, all that stuff ends up in our waterways. And chemical pollutants from a variety of sources, either poor practices at industrial sites, people doing the wrong thing. A lot of those things end up dissolved in the water, and unfortunately you can't see them, but they have a huge impact on the health of the waterway.
Excellent. I guess that answers one of the questions, can I drink stormwater? Well and truly.
Yeah, look, I guess you can't drink stormwater unless it's treated first. And drinking stormwater is not really a practice we do in Australia, but there are many parts of the world where, in fact, wastewater and stormwater is captured and treated, and people actually drink that water. So the technology's there to do that. But at the moment, certainly drinking stormwater without some level of treatment is just not a good idea for your health.
Excellent. I'll find out who asked that question later. How do we find out where our stormwater goes?
So look, there's probably two really obvious sources. Local council is the first one. So they tend to manage a lot of the smaller stormwater network under our streets. And then Sydney Water obviously has a good idea of where the stormwater goes as well, because we own some of the larger drainage assets, particularly in the Cooks River. We own a lot of stormwater drainage assets in the Cooks catchment. But I guess if you were looking specifically for the location of stormwater pipes within your private property or on your school grounds, you may, if you don't have plans for the site, you may need to engage the services of a plumber to sort of map out where those pipes are. But if you're looking at, once it leaves your site, where does it go to? Your council or Sydney Water can generally help with that information.
Excellent. The last question that we have on our list today is collecting stormwater best practice?
I think we could say retaining as much stormwater as possible on site is definitely best practice. As I said, it may not be collecting it specifically in a rainwater tank, that's one method, but it may be those other methods of allowing, having green space to allow it to infiltrate, or, you know, a range of other measures on site where you can retain the water and maximise its reuse if possible.
Fantastic. Okay.
Good questions.
Yeah, I know. And that what we should have done was collect the students' names who asked the questions so we could acknowledge them as well. But we'll learn for next time. Sue, I think you have some information to share with us.
Yeah, thanks. I really just wanted to just illustrate, I guess, what has been said by Leanne, because it was a really great summary. And I'm just going to attempt to share my screen. So thanks, Julie, and thanks, Leanne. That was really useful to hear, especially from a Sydney Water perspective. It's great to hear. I really wanted to spend a few minutes just going through what that practically looks like in the Cooks River. And Leanne talked about what's in the waterway and what is stormwater. So this is the Cooks River catchment here. Many of you should be familiar with this. And this is the Cooks River itself. And there's Muddy Walleye Creek and Muddy Creek up here. And this goes into the city of Sydney and Alexandra Canal. So what we've got here is arrows about water. And when it rains, it really rains. This is Strathfield Golf Course being flooded. And Leanne mentioned that Sydney Water own a number of stormwater assets. So this is the Cooks River here, and this is the Cox's Creek. This is around Strathfield, and it's designed to move water away quickly. It's a stormwater. Here's what it looks like after a little bit of rain, which is quite quick. Again, the question about what's in the water, Leanne mentioned quite a few things. This is a fairly typical outpour after a lot of rain, and this is one of Sydney Water's gross pollutant traps that captures this. This is at Cup and Saucer Creek. This was just after a small bit of rain on the river, and you can see what's swept in. And finally, to answer to the question of does it end up in the bay? It certainly does. This is the entrance at Kiama, right next to the airport, and this is Lady Robinson's Beach, which is really popular for people to swim in and fish. So when you think about what's coming in up the top, this is where it's ending. Now, this quite complicated diagram I'd like to just use to illustrate where water. Can we drink rainwater and stormwater? So this is our catchment here, this area here. And these figures here, these big green arrows, are about how much rainfall falls in the general Sydney area. And this is the bottom here is how much runs off. This bit to the left here is what do we actually use in terms of our drinking water that we draw from Sydney Water and then from Warragamba Dam. And here's this, what Leanne mentioned, wastewater. So what do we actually goes out through our sewer pipes? So in the Cooks River catchment, we have about 106 gigalitres of rain every year, which is a little bit less than the general Sydney area, which is 425. Now of that, 68% or 72 gigalitres rushes straight into our stormwater system and straight down into the rivers and creeks around the Cooks River. Now, if you have a look at generally across Sydney, that's only 46%. So we have a lot more water of our rainwater runs into our creeks and the Cooks River than is normal across the rest of Sydney. And then if you look at what the evaporation and infiltration, so when things land on the ground, how long does it stay there? And does it stay there long enough to then evaporate or slowly drip into the soil? So across Sydney, it's around 53%, but in the Cooks River, only 32% of our rainfall has space to fall on the ground and soak in slowly. And when you think about all the hard surfaces in the Cooks River, that's why we have not enough green spaces and grassy areas and bushland areas for the water to sit on the surface of the soil and slowly sink in. So that's what's happening with our rain and our stormwater. What's happening with our drinking water? So we take 40 gigalitres a year of dam water from Sydney Water System from above Warragamba Dam, so someone else's rain, and that's our drinking water, all the water we use, gardening, all our industry, etc. And of that, 35 gigalitres, about 87%, actually just goes straight out as wastewater through our showers, our toilets. So we use a lot of dam water, but we don't, a lot of it is wasted and goes into our pipes. And then when you look at how much rainfall, we've got 106 gigalitres of rainfall, and yet in the Cooks River we only use 40 gigalitres. So in fact, we have plenty of rain. And the Cooks River, when we talk about stormwater, what we're looking at is too much water. We've got 106 gigalitres falling. Most just goes straight out into our creeks. And when we go to use our dam water from Sydney Water System, we only use 40 gigalitres. So 2.5 times more rain falls than we actually need. So if we wanted to, we could capture all that rainwater. Instead of it being stormwater, we could use it as our dam water. It's very exciting. So what does that look like on the ground, and what might we do with changing how we plan? And if you think about your school grounds, how could you plan your school grounds so that you captured the rainwater where it fell and let it sink into the ground and be reused, or capture it in tanks or some other way? Here's some work we did with Canterbury Bankstown Council on Campsie and having a think about what might happen with Campsie. Those of you who know Campsie, this is a main square. This is what it currently looks like. These blue bits are where it floods. So this is where, if you think about it, before we put all these buildings in, this is where the water would have run. It's a bit like a creek that's no longer there, a ghost creek. But now it just floods. So what could we do to fix that? If we planned Campsie thinking about water instead, we might have planned to have green spaces to slow the water down and capture it so it didn't run off straight into the Cooks River. And instead of all these hard surfaces, we would have green spaces along the roads. Instead of having just hard gutters and hard footpaths, you'd have little bits of garden everywhere that's possible to capture and hold the rain. And then if we had to build buildings to capture and hold the rain, what might that look like? And we have here ways of green spaces in the footpaths. Instead of hard surfaces everywhere, we have walkways. We have residential buildings that have shared spaces. Instead of everybody having their own small backyard that's only big enough for one or not big enough for a tree, we have shared spaces. And we have buildings that have green roofs. We have open spaces, parks that have trees and waterways, and even rail corridors where there's a bit of a swale there to hold the water. So this is being done all over the world, and it's a great opportunity for us to think about what you could do in your school grounds. So in Campsie, we thought about, well, this is what it looks like now. How might we get it to look like something different? And this is what there's in Canada, the same type of place thought through, and this is what they came up with, where instead of having that creek that is just a floodplain and have it piped underground, if we daylight the rivers and the creeks and we have them on top of the water, then instead of being called stormwater, it starts to become a creek, a living place to be. So that's what we could sort of look at as here's what might be possible for Campsie and even your school. And here's another thing that is possible as well, where we haven't got any space to do that. What else could you do? And Leanne mentioned rain gardens. And this is a rain garden at the top of the catchment around Graff Park. And you can see it's on a slope. And this was just a stormwater pit. And it's been outed and daylighted. And when it rains, this fills up with water very quickly, as does this one here. And the water sinks slowly into the soil and then it goes out and it's clean. So when it comes into these pits, here's another one down here. When it comes in, it's got dog poo in it. It's completely unusable. And we've measured it. Here's a measure pipe here, a monitoring pipe. When it's measured coming out, it's clean enough to water your veggies with. So this works. This is something we could do at the end of every street, is think about the stormwater drain in your school could end up being a rain garden. So finally, I included this map here of Sydney Water's stormwater area, and you can see that there's a huge amount of pipes here, and this is the Cooks River catchment area of stormwater. So there's a lot of pipes and a lot of opportunity to change areas into rain gardens and to capture the rain and harvest the rain. So what's the vision for the river, for the Cooks River, and what could you do in your small way in your school grounds is to think about, this is a real park in Singapore where, to me, for those of you who know Canterbury, this looks a little bit like Tasker Park, where there's this broad concrete area that has a main runway, and the purpose of this was as a stormwater drain, so that to get the water away to avoid flooding. And what they've done, just ignore the McDonald's, what they've done is transformed it into a living stream, and it still has the impact of reducing flooding, but in the majority of times when it's not flooding, it acts as a stream, so it's biodiverse, it's somewhere for people to sit, and it's a place that people will enjoy more than this place here. So that's where we're heading, and it would be great to think about what schools can do to assist with that vision. Thanks, Julie.
Excellent. Thank you to both Leanne and Sue for their amazing descriptions of what stormwater is and the future of stormwater. I'm hoping that the students who asked the questions are able to hear the answers. And if you've got any more questions as well about stormwater and the future of stormwater in the Cooks River, we can send them through to us and we can organise for the next question and answer session. But thank you so much for your time, Leanne, and thank you, Sue. Yeah, it was really informative, and I'm hoping the schools will find that too.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.